Shalom. I'm Nama Rue. This is my husband, Harav David Rue. And this is the fourth video that we are making in a series to share about the laws of agriculture that apply to Jewish people when they live in the Holy Land. Do you want to take us from where we went last time to where we are today?
Well, we were talking last time about gifts to the poor, and we didn't finish the gifts to the poor, but we take a diversion before we get to more of the gifts that go to the poor, and we talk about Klayim, which are mixtures, prohibited mixtures. There are three different areas of Klayim, and they are seeds, vineyards, and animals. So in terms of animals, if I have two different species of animal, I'm not allowed to breed them together, and I'm not allowed to make them work together. So I cannot have a donkey and a horse pulling a plow together or pulling a wagon, nor can I breed them together to create a mule. If they have already created a mule, then I'm not required to destroy it. I can use it, but I'm not allowed to create one. The second area of Klayim, of mixtures, is clothing, in that it says that you're not allowed to wear wool and linen together, meaning in one garment. You're not allowed to use either threads or weave them together, attach them together in any way. But if you're wearing two different garments, you could. And the rabbi said that cotton is very similar to linen, and therefore they also prohibited having cotton with wool. You can use it for any other purpose other than wearing it. You could use it as a tent. You could use it as a tablecloth or a seat cover, anything like that. You just can't wear it. The last group is, well, two groups have to do with planting. It says that if you plant anything in a vineyard, that it becomes kadosh, it becomes sanctified, meaning it cannot be used for anything, it must be destroyed. So and there are extensions of this, if someone else would plant, say, oats in your vineyard, and that you allowed them to stay there, or you weeded it in such a way that it would grow better, then you would also be liable to rip out this section of the vineyard.
You mean also the grapes?
The grapes within 16 amot, so about 32 feet of where it existed.
Okay.
In terms of seeds, there are actually different types of seeds. And I'm not going to go into extreme detail on this, but there are seeds that are always planted a whole field, like wheat, oats, rye, spelt, barley, peas, soybeans, things like that. There are things that are planted generally in gardens, in much smaller beds, and then there are flower seeds and things like that. We don't really worry about flower seeds. However, in terms of your crops, you have to keep things at least 2 furrows away, meaning if you would plow the field, you have 2 furrows a minimum of 2 furrows would have to be left empty before you could plant anything else next to it. In terms of...
How big is a furrow?
If you take a plow and run it down the field and it turns over the dirt, that's a furrow.
Okay.
It's about 2 feet wide, I would imagine.
So 4 feet apart.
Approximately.
Okay.
I mean, might depend upon the plow you're using, but approximately that amount. And their plows might have been smaller than our plows today.
Right.
In terms of gardening, the normal vegetable garden, which is probably the most applicable for most people, you have to keep your plants far enough away that they don't look like it's just a bunch of plants. There are many minute details about a garden of such and such a size, what's the most number of plants you could plant in it. However, the simplest thing that the Rambam says, Maimonides says in his laws explaining this, is that you have to plant them far enough apart that the roots and the leaves don't intertwine with each other to separate them. And the Mishnah says, as do all the later authorities as well, that there is a difference between different types of plants. And they talk about Greek squash and gourds and things like that have very large leaves and essentially vines that run across the ground, that you have to leave much greater space around them than you would around other plants, because they will just grow over other plants and you won't be able to tell where your squash end and your tomatoes begin. So essentially you should have some open ground free of roots and leaves between each different type of thing. And you're not allowed to plant one plant here, a different plant next to it, different plant next to it, different plant next to it, because then even if you have some separation, it just looks like a bunch of plants, not like here are my tomatoes, here are my cucumbers, here are my radishes, and so on.
So these are the laws of a garden belonging to a Jew within the land of Israel. And I think when you spoke about not wearing clothing that has cotton or linen mixed with wool, that applies to Jewish people also who live outside of the land.
Yes, as do the prohibitions with animals. And there is a rabbinic prohibition, not from the Torah as the other two are, but there is a rabbinic prohibition against planting anything in a vineyard. The reason why the rabbis prohibited the vineyard and not the other things is because a vineyard has a prohibition of having any benefit at all for it. If you have something grow in it, you have to destroy it. You're not allowed to use the wood, for instance. It has to be utterly destroyed, and you have in such a way that you derive no benefit from it whatsoever. Because there is the Torah is so strict upon that, therefore the rabbis decided to be strict concerning these things outside of the land of Israel at all. However, the seeds in your garden, because there was only a negative prohibition in the land of Israel, therefore they did not extend this prohibition at all to abroad.
And just one last question. What benefit are we allowed to have from a vineyard?
You can use the leaves from it. You can use the grapes from it. You could cut it all down and use the wood for, firewood. You can do whatever you want.
But only benefit from the grapevines.
Right. Anything else that you plant in there would prohibit what else you planted there and the grapevines themselves.
Because they are holy?
Because they have become set aside, let us say.
Okay. Thank you. It's very helpful information. We're leading up to talking about the Shemitah year, which is next year. But first we're laying the foundation, just covering the basic laws of agriculture, right?
Yes.
Thanks.